Okay, so we have started the live stream. So I want to welcome everybody to the Poor People's Campaign, California Poor People's Campaign Climate Crisis event. And thank you all for joining us. And we're going to start with a promo video for the June 18, 2022 Mass Poor People's Assembly and Moral March on Washington, D.C.
We welcome you to the launch of the Mass Poor People's Low-Wage Assembly and Moral March on Washington, D.C., June 18, 2022.
We are a new, unsettling force, and we are powerful. New, unsettling force, and we are here.
We're rising up to demonstrate the compelling power that we, poor and low-income people, have to reconstruct society from the bottom up.
And we need to do it with the loudest voices possible, the biggest actions possible.
Because we know that there is no scarcity in this land. The only scarcity is the moral will to do what's right.
Hold on, just a little while longer.
We are those with sub-minimum wage jobs who can't afford sky-high rent.
People with disabilities are the fastest growing minority group.
It's crazy to me that in 2021, it's still legal for workplaces to pay a sub-minimum wage to people with disabilities.
There are still so much trial and tribulations that we go through as Indigenous people. We can't get a decent wage to sustain ourselves, nor can we get adequate housing.
Veterans across this nation say enough is enough. We can't pat essential workers on the back on one day and then cut their health care the next day.
Health is a political choice.
What more do I need to do to prove that my voice is just as valuable as anyone else's?
There are still forces in denial that would try to slow walk our transition to a clean economy and a just future for us all.
We have an immoral system run by immoral people.
But together we walk, and we fight.
It's time for a change!
Reconstruyamos esta gran nación! See, we are people of resilience. As we fight these interlocking injustices together.
When we work together, mobilize together, and rise together, we become a voice for the voiceless, and we become an agent of change in a time where great change is needed.
We need the third Reconstruction to ensure that deaf people, people with disabilities, and all people can have the right to live and to thrive.
We know what they are doing, but the question is, what are we going to do? Reconstruction begins when we change our mentality and say it's time for you to get your foot off of my neck.
Justice is coming soon.
Hey! Do you believe that of today?
Rising with the mountaintops, flowing with the ocean. We are the protectors, our spirits have awoken. We are the protectors. We are the protectors. Rising with the mountaintops, flowing with the ocean. We are the protectors, our spirits have awoken. We are the protectors. We are the protectors. Rising with the mountaintops, flowing with the ocean. We are the protectors, our spirits have awoken. We are the protectors. We are the protectors. Rising with the mountaintops, flowing with the ocean. We are the protectors, our spirits have awoken.
Welcome. My name is Patrick Archimedes. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm zooming in from the land of the Tongva people. I've been the convener of the planning for this event, and I have the honor of welcoming you all to the California Poor People's Campaign Climate Crisis event. Please introduce yourself in the chat with your name, pronouns, location, and a brief physical description. Thank you for coming, and let us now begin this exciting program with a blessing.
Gugudnik, Anyab Chugik, Bishop Bai, Shannon Rivers. It's good to see many of you here. I want to say a brief prayer and thank you for joining us today. And as I do that, I'm lighting a little bit of sage for you here in the land of Los Angeles, Tongva, Gabrielino, Shoshone, Tataviam, Achaman, and the Quiche people. We want to ask the Creator here to bless us and that our words not only be strong, but carry us through, that we as protectors of Mother Earth, that we be enlightened by not only what is being said here, but actually do something to help and save not only our planet, but our future generations. We want to thank all our guests, all our relatives, our elders, the winged ones, the ones that live in the ocean, and those that will be joining us from around the country. We thank you for being here. May God bless you and may God bless us as we talk about this critical issue. All my relations. Pass it on to Margaret.
All righty, thank you so much. A little tech issue there, getting back in. This is Margaret Prescott. I am the convener of the Policy and Education Working Group that proposed this webinar to the California Coordinating Committee, and we're really delighted that they took it up. So our climate crisis event, I'll tell you a little bit about what is happening. I was just actually on with Pacifica Radio. They are carrying this broadcast live at the moment. And I would like to ask our tech team to be in touch with William Barber III. He is having some trouble checking in on Zoom, but we are delighted that our program will include Tom Goldtooth with the Indigenous Environmental Network, Jacqueline Patterson of the Chisholm Legacy Project, William Barber III of the Climate Reality Project, and testimony from Josiah Edwards, who is with the Sunrise Movement. We're asking all of you today, we're delighted that you all took time this afternoon to join us. So please put your questions in the chat. Questions will be sent on to the planning group and we will follow up with you. We're also asking, we want to be able to be in touch with each and every one of you. We are asking you to put your name and your email in the chat, including your city and town. And again, I'm Margaret Prescott. I'm also part of California Coordinating Committee, my women's network, Women of Color and the Global Women's Strike. We're national partners of the Poor People's Campaign. And all of you know the crisis we are facing. Climate change, according to the World Health Organization, the greatest threat to global health in the 21st century. Land temperatures have increased about twice as fast as the global average, and every year, approximately 75 billion tons of fertile soil is lost to land degradation. Islands in the Pacific Ocean and the Caribbean are due to if nothing is done, will literally sink into the sea. So with no further ado, I would like now to go on to let you know what's next. We're delighted to have the songstress, Arne, join us in the tradition of the Poor People's Campaign. Music is so important to what we do. So let us go to hear from Arne right now. Thank you.
Greetings, neighbors. Here's an Eco Rights remix on a movement classic. Jump on in. Mother Nature is on fire. We gotta fight for her survival. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on, hold on. Mother Nature is screaming loud. We gotta stand up, the time is now. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on, hold on, hold on. burning wild. How much more will we allow? Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on, hold on. Our survival is at stake. There's so much action we must take. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on, hold on. To the babies we must explain. Tell the truth about climate change. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on, hold on. Climate change is an emergency fed by cruel humanity. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on, hold on, hold on. And hold on, hold on. Our house is on fire before our eyes. We must trust science over lies. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on, hold on. Climate deniers, they say we're wrong. We got to keep on growing stronger. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on, man. Crazy weather all across the land makes me wanna holler, throw up both my hands. Oh, keep them on the prize and hold on. Some people say it's already too late. We got to keep on pushing anyway. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on, hold on, hold on. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on, hold on, hold on. Ashe.
Thank you, Arne. That was beautiful. Thank you so much. My name is Shannon Rivers. As I mentioned earlier, I have the pleasure to introduce Mr. Tom Goldtooth. Tom, it's good to see you, brother. I am part of the policy and education group here at PPC, Poor People's Campaign. So Tom, Mr. Goldtooth, is the executive director of the Indigenous Environmental Network. Tom has been awarded with recognition for his achievements throughout the past 40 years as a change maker within the environmental, economic, energy, and climate justice movement. From the strength of his community organizing and the leadership, he brought the local issues of Indigenous peoples related to the environmental protection of land, water, air, and health to the national and international forum. From his participation and leadership in the first National People of Color Environmental Justice Leadership Summit in 1991 in DC, to the 2010 World People's Conference on Climate Change and the Rights of Mother Earth in Cochabamba, Bolivia, and to the recent confirmation of the United Frontline Table, it is and its people's orientation to regenerative economy and its indigenous plank. He has been in the forefront of the key moments fighting for systemic change. He is an award-winning producer of Drumbeat of Mother Earth, addressing the effects of bioaccumulation and biomagnification of toxic chemicals in the natural food web and bodies of Indigenous peoples. Tom just recently returned from COP26. Tom, I want to thank you for all your work and all the awards that you've done. Your list is long. I will appreciate you joining us today, and I want to turn it over to Tom. Tom, thank you so much for being here, and it's great to see you once again, and I hope your family is in good health. Tom.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Tahanshi. I'm cutting it tight here. I'm just really blessed to have been able to get home here. I live way out in the country, not far from the headwaters of the Mississippi River, and it snowed up here, ice and snow right now, and yeah. So I just got back from Glasgow. So hello everyone, yat everyone, how me dakiapi. In our Dene, Navajo and Dakota ways, greeting you. Oh, it's good to be back. There's so many things I could talk about, but I want to be respectful of the time for all the other speakers. And definitely I have a message to talk to the listeners about. And wow, what can I say? This was a very critical meeting, and it was the 26th year of the Conference of the Parties. And Conference of the Parties means the governments of the world that are participating in this UN process to negotiate the survival of our planet. I remember John Trudell years ago, he said, you know, Mother Earth's going to be okay. You know, Mother Earth's going to take care of herself in any way that she needs to, you know, and the pitiful ones really are us human beings, you know, insects, ants and birds, and, you know, most animals are going to be able to make it. But us, you know, we're the ones that are going to have hard times. And I really do believe that. And I must say that with, you know, when I went over to Glasgow, there's many different side events and presentations and workshops that were being held that we scheduled, you know, our delegation to speak at. We took 18 Native people here from Alaska and lower 48, from the US here. And we had our sister organization, the Indigenous Climate Action Network, and we also brought some relatives from Brazil and Ecuador, and it was really powerful as far as what the voices of our people were talking about. We had a couple folks from our front lines. Our grandma Mary Lyon was with us. And she's from up here in northern Minnesota. She's Anishinaabe. She's one of the traditional knowledge holders, and she was with us as well. She's one of the water protectors on line 3, Enbridge line 3. You know, one thing that I spoke about as well as my brother, Chief Ninawa Hunakwai from the Acre, Brazil, is that, you know, we were there with the authority of our spiritual elders, and I remember Chief Ninawa a week and a half ago said to a large gathering of people and said that, you know, the world leaders don't have a spiritual foundation. They're really like children, and they're dealing with negotiations that they have no understanding of, and we saw that. Some of you may have heard you know, the message that we made as an Indigenous Environmental Network at the conclusion. But, you know, after all these years of these UN negotiations, the 26th year, this Conference of the Party 26 really delivered a disastrous outcome. I like to say something, you know, more positive, other than I do have hope, though. We can talk about that later, but you know, the meeting was supposed to end on Friday afternoon, but it overflowed into the night and finally concluded the next day, this past Saturday. And those of us that were there were talking about, there was really some powerful politics going on, corporations, we call it the Conference of the Polluters, a lot of the petroleum fossil fuel industries out in the hallways, and there's certain agendas that they wanted. This is a trade. This is a trade negotiations. Not really doesn't have anything to do with fossil fuels. Fossil fuels is the elephant in the room that no one wants to really deal with. We know that the sky, the atmosphere is like a bathtub that is overflowing with too much carbon. Mother Earth can't absorb that. And a lot of their large NGOs know that. Financial institutions, fossil fuel industry know that. Big government knows that. They try to hide it though. So there's a lot of false solutions. And that's something that we were trying to elevate in our delegation, that we don't need no more false solutions, such as carbon markets, carbon offsets, and we can get into that later, geoengineering, techno fixes, and that's just allows the greenwashing of the fossil fuel corporations to continue to extract and burn the combustion process of fossil fuels, which contributes to greenhouse gases. So there was an agenda out of this conference of the party to pass certain significant articles of the Paris Agreement of 2015. 2015 was has a lot of articles that are part of the rulemaking of implementing the Paris Agreement, and one of those was Article 6. And we were working with our Indigenous delegation, North and South, around trying to create some political will from the small island states and some of the developing countries who are very concerned as well about false solutions, but they just did not have the power with the big industrialized northern countries. Article 6 passed, and basically Article 6 was a carbon marking, carbon offset initiative that will end up creating a process for allowing fossil fuel companies to continue to pollute. And from our analysis with the science as well, is that there's no chance of keeping global warming below 1.5 Celsius. I like to feel that somewhere in that analysis that it's wrong, but already, it doesn't look good. And there's a lot to be said, but I think part of our organizing strategy is that we need to continue to build grassroots movement here in the United States, Canada, but also globally. There was a lot of pressure coming from civil society, from the People's Summit outside in the streets in Glasgow that understand what I'm talking about. But, there's a lot of politics on the inside, exchange of money. And one of the big issues was the push for making a transition away from fossil fuel economy. And the coal issue was a big issue, coal. And in the European Union, they did not achieve what they were hoping to bring to the COP, and that was Germany to make some stronger commitments on reducing their dependency on coal, as well as in the US. Biden wasn't able to bring to the COP some of those strong provisions that he based his election on, was to cut back on fossil fuels and make this transition that we're all pushing. So, back to that component of Article 6, basically what it's a little complex, but basically it consists of what's known as the internationally transferred mitigation outcomes, ITMOs, and people can Google search ITMOs, but essentially that allows countries like the United States and Canada, EU, and many other large companies to trade, to use carbon markets. if they invest and petroleum industries invest in buying carbon pieces of paper, carbon credits, and protecting tropical forests and the Amazon, they can look good on paper. They can offset Chevron, Shell, ConocoPhillips. They all can say I've gone carbon neutral, but they will continue to pollute locally. They're not cutting back, but they're offsetting their pollution. That doesn't say much to the people who live next to oil refineries who are still dying from respiratory illnesses. So the ITMOs that are part of the mechanism of the rulemaking of the Paris Agreement is going to allow countries to meet their nationally determined contributions. That's those voluntary pledges that was developed because the Paris Agreement was not a legally binding treaty putting, requirements on countries of the world, especially the US, to reduce their emissions. It's voluntary through these national determined contributions. So this ITMO makes it possible for US and other countries to transfer technology or finance, to trade carbon credits and carbon trading schemes to meet their pledges. So on paper, it looks good. They'll say, well, I reduce this much to achieve emissions reduction. But in reality, the studies show carbon pricing, carbon markets, carbon offsets do not reduce emissions at source at the level that is needed to meet that threshold 1.5. And, people can look at that, they can Google search it, and that's part of the reality. The other thing is that, we're telling them a lot of the geoengineering technologies are not going to get us there either. And some of it is violating our traditional knowledge. In Alaska, some of the push is the Arctic Ice Project, putting little miniature glass beads, spreading it over the melted snow area, the melted ice, and sure, we understand that's involved with reflecting sunlight back up into, the atmosphere, but there's no environmental review of that process. It's just being pushed with no inclusion of consulting with the whalers, consulting with the people up there, but they're working through Alaska Native corporations though, around a money agenda. Sure. So these are critical areas. And the Sami in Sweden had to stop a project called Scope X, messing around with the stratosphere with particulates that they said could affect their reindeer culture, their lichen and vegetation that they depend on in northern Sweden. So these are areas that we were very concerned with incorporating our traditional knowledge, trying to strengthen also human rights and the rights of Indigenous peoples' language in this Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. And there's some language in what they call the preambular text, but we wanted to get that strong language in the operational text, which was not possible at the level that we need. We were trying to push the standards of these different articles, like Article 6, embracing free, prior, and informed consent, but there was a resistance from the governments as well.
Tom,
so I just wanted to just kind of give that overview. There's more stuff that, we could talk about, but I think it's just, again, in quick summary, my brother is, this system does not respect that sacredness of Mother Earth and Father Sky. We're saying that, Mother Earth isn't for sale. Let's not bring this into a market system of capitalism that has no value, no respect for that sacredness of Mother Earth. How do we reconcile that as Indigenous peoples if we are going to participate in that system and sell carbon, sell the soil? They're even approaching our farmer and say, we'll give you money if you sequester carbon in the soil. Oh, by the way, let's use these GMO climate-friendly seeds as well. So that's what we're facing, techno fixes, market systems, that part of the financialization of nature.
Well, I want to thank you, Tom, for all your hard work. Lexi, brother, uncle, that you've been doing some great work, and we stand next to you. And we thank you for your ceremonial and traditional leadership and bringing and sharing the voice with on the world stage. We thank you so much for being here with us today, and you're welcome to stay. And we hope that you can, as long as you don't have to shovel any snow today. But
Well, I do. All my kids are grown now. My grandkids are living with them. So, but net zero was something we really pushed out against, as well as so-called nature-based solutions, which is just the rebranding of what I talked about, putting a price to nature, selling nature in these market schemes. Again, it doesn't cut emissions at source. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you very much. And I want to move on now to our next speaker and to Stacy.
Thank you. Thank you, Elder Goldtooth, and thank you, Shannon. I can't believe that I get to introduce someone that we look forward to getting to know a lot more of. William J. Barber III, JD, son of our own Bishop William Barber II, the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. We know him for his work with the Climate Reality Project and as co-chair of the North Carolina Poor People's Campaign Ecological Justice Committee. As a graduate of the University of North Carolina School of Law, he is also the CEO and founder of the Rural Beacon Initiative, which has for the better part of a decade sought to scale community ownership across the Southeast in a new clean energy economy. He is clear that true climate solutions require climate justice, and I just thought I'd end with a couple of his own words. A society grows great when old men plant trees in whose shade they will never sit. Our world, our fights, we must build the world in which we know we deserve to live. Please welcome William J. Barber III. You here?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me? Let me say good evening to everyone. It's so good to be amongst what feels like family with the Poor People's Campaign here in California. Thank you for the introduction. I just want to say I'm so inspired by the fight, the fierceness, the commitment that each and every one of you are joining on this call as we talk about this urgent crisis of the climate crisis. You know, in 1963, Dr. King spoke of this urgency of now. 68 years later, when we talk about 2021, his words ring true with renewed vigor, our own fierce urgency of now. When we think about every young person whose future hangs in the balance regarding what we do to solve this climate crisis, there is a fierce urgency of now. We think about every elder, every veteran, every seasoned activist who wonders if they did enough to stymie this crisis. There's a fierce urgency of now. And then when we think about every community, Indigenous, Black, poor, rural, coastal, whose very existence rests on how this crisis will evolve, there's a fierce urgency of now. You know, the climate crisis is the existential crisis of our time, hands down. But it is made worse by the twin crises of poverty and democracy. What do I mean? When we look at the poverty rates, 140 million poor people in the United States alone. An additional 119 to 124 million people pushed into extreme poverty in 2020 associated with the COVID-19 pandemic. And on top of that, an additional 132 million people potentially pushed into extreme poverty by 2030 with an unaddressed climate crisis. That's an urgency of now. UN Chief Antonio Guterres described current poverty levels as a moral indictment on our time, citing the culmination of major challenges, including the pandemic, including global conflict, and including climate change. We saw for the first time in 2 decades, globally, the rise in extreme poverty. It's made worse by climate change. Talk about the crisis of our democracy, where here in the United States, 2016 was the first presidential election we had without the full protection of the Voting Rights Act. Did anything happen in 2016? That's a rhetorical question. I do that everywhere I go. Did anything happen in 2016? Talk about right now, as we're looking at the passage of the infrastructure bill, critical elections, critical appointments to the federal courts, attacks on the right to vote, attacks on access to the ballot, attempts to dissuade populations from voting through longer voting lines, voter times, removal of polling places. It's an urgency, it's a fierce urgency of now. And recognize that the only way that we get to robust action on the climate crisis, on the poverty crisis, on the 5 ills as have been laid out by the Poor People's Campaign is by having unimpeded access to the ballot. But this attack on democracy is not just something happening here in the United States. Since 2017, democracy faced its most serious crises globally. We saw a reduction in guarantees of free and fair elections. We saw a reduction of the rights of communities of color. We saw a reduction of freedom of the press and the rule of law under attack around the world. 71 countries suffered net declines in political rights and civil liberties, only 35 registering gains. This marked the 12th consecutive year of decline in global freedom. The US retreated from its traditional role as an imperfect champion of democracy, saw an accelerating decline in American political rights and civil liberties. And over the period since this decline happened, beginning in 2006, 113 countries have seen a net decline and only 62 have experienced a net improvement. It's a crisis, it's an urgency of now. And I talk about the crisis of poverty, talk about the crisis of democracy, talk about the crisis of climate, because when we look at where we are as a current movement, this forms a parameter, a web of impact in which we find ourselves and must engage. This forms that reminder of the inescapable web of mutuality that King talked about, in which we find ourselves and must engage. We think about the impact of COVID, that global moment of collective suffering. In many ways, as terrible as that was just a precursor of the impact that we will see for communities, for nations across the globe with an unaddressed climate crisis. You know, there was a recent takeaway from the international IPCC report from the UN to talk about the climate change. There were 5 key takeaways. The first, climate change is indisputably human caused. The report got straight to the point and said that at the beginning, it is unequivocal that human influence has worsened the atmosphere ocean, and land. Widespread and rapid changes in the atmosphere, ocean, cryosphere, and biosphere have occurred as a result of human activity. What has that activity looked like? It's decades of environmental injustice. It's decades of a social dependence on fossil fuel infrastructure. It's decades of polluting our communities, our people, polluting Mother Earth to meet our energy needs. It's decades of having communities who have been the most vulnerable be targeted for this polluting infrastructure, suffer for generations of health impacts, suffer for generations of family poverty by being locked into extractive economies, suffer and not contribute the most to this crisis, because we know that poor communities, environmental justice communities, communities of colors who have been in the wake of these facilities consume less energy per capita than more affluent households. What does that mean? The same communities that have for generations have borne the brunt of our dependence on fossil fuel infrastructure and who have contributed the least to the demand for that infrastructure now viciously find themselves on the front lines of a climate crisis where they're being hit first and worst. That's the urgency of now. Number two, report from key takeaway from the IPCC report was that 2010 to 2020 was the hottest decade in 125,000 years. What does that mean? Ever since the early 1980s, global temperatures were initially being tracked. There's been a steady shift to the warmer end of the spectrum, global temperatures, that has corresponded with the steady emission of greenhouse gases, which has been directly related to anthropogenic industrial activity. And from this, we see all kinds of consequences. We see extreme weather, increased hurricanes. We see heat waves in places that we've never seen. We've seen flooding on unprecedented levels. We see winter storms in places like Texas that have never seen these temperatures. We see disruptions of our ecosystems, disruptions of the ocean, disruption of the Gulf Stream and the jet stream, the systems that our planet depend to regulate itself. This pollution, this crisis has real consequence for planet and for people. We see when heat waves hit, disproportionate impacts of who actually suffers, who dies from those heat waves, because we know through studies of environmental injustice that people of color, the elderly, and the extremely young are more susceptible to those fluctuations in temperatures. We see as a result of these rising temperatures effects on the ability to provide food for communities who are already suffering from food access and hunger. We know that for every 1 degree C in warming in global temperature, there are significant yield declines in corn, wheat, soy, the crops that make up 2/3 of human caloric diet across the nation, across the world. We see this. Number 3, takeaway from the IPCC report, that certain changes we've already seen at this moment are irreversible. Even if we were able to make emissions drop to 0 tomorrow, there are certain effects of the climate change crisis being felt right now among frontline communities that are here to stay. When we talk about those extreme weather events like the flooding, like the wildfires, like the drought and the mudslides that have increased in recent years. Attempts to lower emissions are being done with the hope to limit the impact to the current levels of devastation, the current levels of increased extreme weather, the current levels of hurricane impact and flooding. So when we think about the devastation that's happening now, already, it makes us realize we do not have time to waste on this crisis. The current impact is already devastating. Mother Earth and communities across the globe cannot wait on action and see that devastation get increased much more. Number 4 takeaway, greenhouse gas emissions, leading cause of climate change. There was some debate left on where the biggest contributors to the climate crisis were coming from. The report really issued a scathing outlook, identifying greenhouse gas emissions as the main culprit. Where are some of the sources of those emissions? Our energy sector, of course, one of the main contributors. Our transportation sector, of course. Our agricultural sectors, but also some lesser known sectors. Deforestation was a major contributor. The loss of green space through development and construction was a major contributor. The heating and rapid acidification of the ocean as a result was a major contributor. The melting of our ice caps, which corresponds to greater levels of flooding, was a major contributor. But there was no doubt that greenhouse gas emissions were the leading cause of this crisis. Now, why is that so important? Because many times when we thought about in the discourse around solutions, too often there have been false solutions put forth that look at natural gas pipelines as bridge fuels, that look at cementing biogas as a bridge fuel, that at the very moment where we should be seeing a cessation in the emission of greenhouse gases, there are actually conversations where solutions are being put forth to increase those greenhouse gases. It's just a different form. It may not be carbon dioxide, it may be methane, but still a greenhouse gas with sometimes even greater warming impact. That is so critical for us to know, because we must challenge this sense of false solutions.
That's right.
Now, as I wrap, fifth piece, climate events are increasing in severity and number in every region of the planet. This was one of the most dire takeaways from the IPCC, is just how extensive the impacts of global warming would be. Right now, economic losses from extreme weather totaled $653 billion over the past 2 years alone. So when we really are seeing debate around what is the cost of solving this crisis, when we're seeing debates like the Build Back Better plan, where it outlines about $555 billion to address and solve the climate crisis, we must flip the narrative. It is not the cost. What does it take to solve this crisis? It is, what is the cost of not solving this crisis? What is the human cost? What is this cost to our environment? What is the cost of families on the front lines? That is how we must think about this issue. That is how we must think about this. And as I close, there is hope. There is hope. We know that right now, clean energy is the cheapest source of energy generation for over 2/3 of the planet, and costs are falling. We know that right now, the sun produces enough energy to meet the entirety of humanity's energy needs per year in 1 hour. We know that right now, wind energy, if deployed correctly, could address and solve and source human energy needs 40 times over. But we must do this in the right way. We must do this recognizing the urgency. We must do this recognizing that we have to seed opportunities for ownership in frontline communities. We must do this recognizing that we cannot continue to look at frontline communities as simply victims, but they must be co-creators in this new world, in this new economy. We must do this the right way. We must do this with the lens of environmental justice, of equity, climate justice. We must be humble enough to recognize the contribution of our Indigenous brothers and sisters, who, though representing only 5% of the global population, contribute to 80% of global biodiversity. We must do this. So as I close, right. I say, this is very much an urgency of now, where we must act. But there is hope if we act and act together. Thank you.
Well, thank you so very much, William Barber III. As they say, the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. Those of us on the Poor People's Campaign, we are really just delighted that you are able to join us, and Tom Goldtooth, who came before you. The urgency of now. Thank you, my brother. Thank you so very much. This is Margaret Prescott. I'd like to welcome those who are just joining us. Pacifica Radio, our stations in DC and in New York City. They're carrying this live as we speak. So for those of you online, a lot of other people are also listening in right now. I would like to remind everyone to check the chat for links, including how to donate. Remember to put your questions in the chat. We're short on time, so we don't have time for a Q&A now, but keep in mind, this is a kickoff event for us. We want to host a series of workshops on the climate crisis, digging deep into so many aspects of it. So be sure to put your contact information on the chat. This is Margaret Prescott, convener of the Policy and Education Working Group. I also want to quickly thank the quad chairs of the California Coordinating Committee, Faye Wilson Kennedy, Mel Nyhan, My Hand, Rose Goodell, and the Reverend Beth Johnson. What I'd like to do now is to bring on someone from our Arts and Action Working Group, doing a role now of introducing our next speaker, Tom Grody. Tom?
Thank you, Margaret. I have the honor of introducing our next speaker, Ms. Jacqueline Patterson. Jacqueline Patterson is the founder and executive director of the Chisholm Legacy Project, which is a resource hub for Black frontline climate justice leadership. The Chisholm Legacy Project serves as a vehicle to connect Black communities on the front lines of climate justice with the resources needed to actualize visions. Ms. Patterson has published multiple articles, reports, and toolkits, including Equity and Resilience Building for Climate Adaptation, and The People Shall Lead, centralizing frontline community leadership in the movement towards a sustainable planet. Climate change is a civil rights issue. She holds a master's degree in social work from the University of Maryland and a master's degree in public health from Johns Hopkins University. And so now Ms. Patterson will speak to us about the powerful and transformative work she is involved with on the front lines. Thank you, Ms. Patterson.
Thank you. Hopefully, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. I really am so honored to be here, and always when Sister Margaret calls, I answer. It's such a joy to work with her over the years. So I am calling actually from the airport, also coming from Glasgow and the UN climate talks, and also with a bit of a travel mishap that has me calling from a departure lounge here at Atlanta Airport. So, but it's such a joy to be here with you all. When I say I'm in Atlanta, it's the unceded territory of the Muskogee Nation. So I'll just start by saying that I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago. My mom came up to Chicago through the Great Migration from a tiny unincorporated area of Mississippi called Dublin. And my first trip out of the COVID-19 lockdown was in October of last year, and I drove down to Dublin. My mom passed away in 2013, and I decided I wanted to drive down there and really visit the community that my mom was born in, and really pay homage to the path that she and so many others took. I walked in the cotton fields in her community and saw the huge kind of mechanized tractors that were harvesting the cotton. And I bent down myself and picked a piece of cotton and held it in my hand and thought about the enslaved labor that was used to reap that cotton, and the essential work being done by the people who reaped that cotton, but where the work was essential, but the people were considered to be disposable. And I really thought of that also in the context of COVID-19 as well, where there are people whose work is essential, but yet they themselves are not honored as the essential people that they are in our economy and in our world. My dad came to Chicago as an immigrant from Jamaica, seeking opportunity in the very nation that was instrumental in stripping his homeland of the opportunity to be self-sufficient. Earlier this year, I was asked to speak at the Ecumenical Advocacy Days annual meeting on the intersection of domestic and foreign policy in the context of Earth rights and climate change. And I started by sharing an excerpt from the film Life and Debt, which I definitely encourage folks to watch if you ever have the chance. The film is set in Jamaica, and it tells the story that is illustrative of the path of imperialism in US domestic and foreign policy and the practices that and the practices that we engage in. And it builds on the historical texts that I would recommend, like How Europe Underdeveloped Africa and others that really tell that story. And so all of that kind of path that we've been on in terms of the founding of this place that we now call the United States has led us to where we are in terms of this being on this collision course with catastrophic climate change. In the voices of the people in that video and beyond, we get a snapshot of the impacts of US pursuit in amassing wealth and power and creating dependencies very systemically and deliberatively, systematizing imperialism through trade policies and structural adjustment programs. As we consider the path that we need to set ourselves on to restore the earth and her people, we must remember that our ecosystem was divinely designed. The earth systems are structured to be regenerative and to provide all that we need with abundance. The sun, the wind, ocean waves, geothermal sources provide the energy that we need to power our nation. The earth as well has seeds that have lasted for a millennia. They provide all the food that we need. The earth is 2/3 water. So we have what we need to not only survive, but to thrive. And whether it's the bee colonies or the ant colonies, the zebra dazzles, I was interested to hear that groups of zebra are called dazzles anyway, or the lion prides. Most of the creatures on earth know that cooperation is the key to survival and well-being. It is only humanity and the dominant cultures of industrialized nations that have managed to kind of muck up the plan of how the ecosystem was designed. On this path, we have to dismantle the colonization of the indigenous lands and the very principles and practices that form the making of what has now become the United States of America. This land went from being colonized with the stolen lands, identity, and resources, and transformed into being a colonizer by the thieves who branded themselves as the founding fathers. Contrary to this dominant narrative around religious freedom, they did this while advancing a false scarcity narrative that in order for the settlers to be well, they have to murder, displace, and enslave others. And these practices have persisted and have been institutionalized in our policies. So now we have a nation that's built on these principles of enclosure, of wealth and power, of materialism, of greed, of extraction, of exploitation, of domination. From the Morrill and Homestead Acts that provided resources to white landowners, not that weren't afforded to Black landowners, to redlining, to gentrification and other forms of displacement, perpetuated the Black land loss and extreme wealth differentials. From Citizens United to voter suppression that strips any notion of a democracy and puts entities like polluters in the driver's seat, to a capitalist economy which is predicated on a formula that institutionalizes winners and losers, consistently putting BIPOC people on the losing end of this economic equation. All of this puts us again squarely on this path to catastrophic climate change, and would set us up for where we were even in terms of how the pattern of impact went with COVID-19, not only in our nation, but across the world, and the disparity in resources of who has access and who doesn't. Cancer clusters, asthma clusters are the order of the day in our communities, BIPOC communities, low-income white American communities. People having their electricity turned off for non-payment for a couple of $60 pills, while the CEOs of these companies who are flipping the switch make an average of $9.8 million in compensation every year, and the profits go to lining the pockets of the already wealthy, while also going to lobbying to fight against not only clean air and clean energy, but also goes to groups like ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. So through groups like ALEC, these profits go to push forward on voter suppression, school privatization, water privatization, and prison privatization. As we even look at it through a gender justice lens, we have to recognize the differential impact and the differential leadership of BIPOC women. We have the differential impact with everything from the endocrine disruptors and the pollution that comes out of these smokestacks, to the fact that in the context of the disasters that William talked about, we have the spikes in violence against women that happen in those contexts. We have along the oil and gas pipelines, the missing and the proliferation of missing and murdered Indigenous women. Someone mentioned in the chat about uranium mining. Speaking of Indigenous women, I was in Kayenta, Arizona, where it was at the founding meeting of what is now the Climate Justice Alliance. And I was struck and took a picture of this uranium mining clinic. Like it was a clinic for uranium mine workers. Like the very fact that you have a clinic that's dedicated to the workers in the uranium mines, let's know, again, institutionalizing the sacrifice of people, really seeing those people as disposable workers. Because yes, you're setting up a clinic for them, but you're assuming that people are going to be sickened by something that's not necessary for our energy landscape. So these are the kinds of situations that we find ourselves in. As Tom said, we came from the COP26, and going into that meeting, I wrote an article called "Message to COP26 Negotiators: Capitalism Never Really Worked Out for the Earth or for BIPOC Communities." And it picked up on some of the same themes I covered in another article I wrote earlier this year, right after the election or the inauguration. Dear President Biden, what not to do on climate. So our time in Glasgow really reinforced what we know about a global geopolitical system of maintaining the status quo without concern for global South nations and BIPOC people, pushing for false and damaging solutions from biofuels to biomass to nuclear to natural gas to geoengineering to carbon markets. This is all part of a suite of interconnected policies that continue to dominate and oppress globally, from trade policies prohibiting manufacturing and other restrictions to aid tied to patronage of US companies, even when it's a death sentence, as we saw with the AIDS crisis, where the money had to go towards purchasing antiviral drugs that were manufactured in the US over generic drugs, which were literally 10 times or more less expensive, yet equally effective, while they stacked graves at 12 and 6 feet under in sub-Saharan Africa, because the cemeteries didn't have enough space for the rate of people who were dying. So they literally had to bury people both 12 feet under and 6 feet under to have the space. Big agricultural groups like Monsanto creating Terminator seeds, going against the very laws of nature, while farmers in India are committing suicide because of the ruination of their farms. World Bank and IMF structural adjustment programs impacting basic services in the commons, wherein children can't even go to school due to hefty education fees, and resulting in such situations such as the fact that there are more Malawian nurses in the United Kingdom than there are in the entirety of the country of Malawi. So we perpetuate these situations through a combination of finance policies, militarism, and beyond. The US is 4% of the global population, at 25% of the emissions that drive climate change. But yet, but that doesn't even account for the U.S. exports and the responsibility we bear for the emissions in places like China, which is one of the bigger polluters. But it's because of our demand for the goods, because of our excessive consumerism. So we're demanding the goods that they produce. And so while we have these, thank you. Our policies and practices have disabled other nations from being able to build the capacity for regenerative design, energy efficiency, and clean energy, while we build their dependency on our exported coal and liquefied natural gas. We have places like Mpumalanga in South Africa, where coal mining makes it the most polluted place in the world. And yet we refuse to support climate finance so that the nations can adapt to climate change. And finally, even as our actions drive people from their lands, we have punitive immigration policies where people come seeking refuge, and we greet people with state-sponsored officials on horseback corralling people with reins being used as whips, or we put children in cages. In the words of Kenyan-born Somali poet Warshan Shireg, no one puts their children in a boat unless the water is safer than the land. So I'll just wrap my remarks, I only have about 2 minutes left, by saying
Thank you, Jacqueline.
Oh yeah, so I'll just wrap that saying that, that in order for us to really get where, because I don't want to just like end you in this horribly grim note, but according to my calculation, I do have 1 minute left. So we really have to move towards operational principles and practices and values that really center caring for the sacred, cooperation, regeneration, abundance, and democracy. And this is already happening with people fighting pipelines like the Dakota Access Pipeline, the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, Line 3, people like Soul Fire Farm and Earthseed Permaculture advancing food justice, the Just Solutions Collective, Local Clean Energy Alliance, Native Renewables advancing energy democracy, For the Love of Water, We the People of Detroit advancing water justice, Right to the City, the Land Back movements are advancing land justice, Uprose, the Mycelium Project are advancing youth leadership, voting rights is being pushed by folks like Move to Amend and the Democracy Initiative. And so in Glasgow, we met with the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance and other diaspora groups to really launch, continue what we launched in 2015, this initiative, the Global Afro-Descendant Climate Justice Collaborative, through which we'll organize as Black people, but also link arms with our other folks in the movement, like the folks on this call. So looking forward to continuing to work with you all, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to provide these brief remarks.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline Patterson. Just not only brilliant analysis, but you have been on the front lines walking your talk, just as Tom Goldtooth and William Barber. We're really honored to have you. Thank you so much, Jacqueline Patterson. And what we're going to do right now, we're going to hear from some young people. The youth are calling us out. They're calling us to account. They're calling governments to account. Let's hear a short clip now from Greta Thunberg, who is now 18 years old. She was 16 when she started out being so involved in the youth movement for climate justice, chiding world leaders and telling us about the urgency of now. Let us hear from Greta Thunberg right now.
This is not about some expensive, politically correct green act of bunny hugging or blah, blah, blah. Build back better, blah, blah, blah. Green economy, blah, blah, blah. Net zero by 2050, blah, blah, blah. Net zero by 2050, blah, blah, blah. Net zero, blah, blah, blah. Climate neutral, blah, blah, blah. This is all we hear from our so-called leaders. Words that sound great, but so far has led to no action. Our hopes and dreams drown in their empty words and promises. Of course, we need constructive dialogue, but they've now had 30 years of blah, 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 and where has that led us? But, of course, we can still turn this around. It is entirely possible. It will take drastic annual emission cuts, unlike anything the world has ever seen. And as we don't have the technological solutions that alone can deliver anything close to that, that means we will have to change. We can no longer let the people in power decide what is politically possible or not. We can no longer let the people in power decide what hope is. Hope is not passive. Hope is not blah, blah, blah. Hope is telling the truth. Hope is taking action. And hope always comes from the people.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Ward?
Hi, my name is Ward Kanowski. I'm happy to be introducing Josiah Edwards. Josiah joins us from the Sunrise Movement, Los Angeles. Sunrise is a movement to stop climate change and create millions of good jobs in the process. And Sunrise is building an army of young people to make climate change an urgent priority across America. So again, I'm happy to welcome Josiah. So Josiah, take it away.
All right. Hi, everybody. Like Ward said, my name is Josiah Edwards. I'm a member of Sunrise Movement, which is a movement of young people dedicated to stopping climate change and creating millions of good jobs in the process. I'm 21 years old. I come from Los Angeles. And as the climate crisis rages, wildfires in California, hurricanes in the Gulf South and on the Eastern Seaboard, cold snaps from Texas to Minnesota, it is very clear that we have no choice but to act and the need to act now. Our movement was born of a small group of young people that exploded into thousands. And our movement's founders could have never imagined that it would be like that. And that's because we worked to grow our power. We put ourselves on the map over the course of the past 5 years by taking action in Nancy Pelosi's office when she became Speaker of the House, and then following that when we confronted Senator Dianne Feinstein from California, who frankly disrespected young people by saying that she didn't believe or wrote her own version of the Green New Deal that actually wouldn't confront the climate crisis. When we grew our power and put ourselves on the map, we continued to elect Green New Deal champions like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Cori Bush, Ilhan Omar, Jamal Bowman, Rashida Tlaib, Ayanna Pressley, who you might know as folks who held the line in this recent fight for the reconciliation package. We won the inclusion of our priority legislation in the reconciliation package, the Civilian Climate Corps, and which is really our biggest win, is that we polarized the public and popularized the Green New Deal. Now let's talk a little bit about the Green New Deal. The Green New Deal is an intersectional document. We have to contextualize this fight because, you know, in Sunrise, we call this the People's Alignment, but we're not the first to give it that name, and we won't, or a name, and we won't be the last. The Poor People's Campaign understands this, and it's in the very name. Dr. King understood this in the form of the beloved community. That is that this fight is an intersectional fight. Climate justice cannot be achieved without racial justice or economic justice or housing justice or gender justice. It can't be achieved without justice. So we're in the fight for it all. People often criticize us because we don't stay in our lane. We don't focus on environmentalism, on conservation, on saving and protecting wildlife. We're for all of that and more, because we understand that it's the practices, the extractive practices of racialized capitalism that brought us to this point in the first place. And that's what we're really fighting against. And so we take those efforts and emphasize them in our current fight today. Now, what is that current fight? I already referred to it a few times. It's the Build Back Better Act and the Exxon deal, or the reconciliation packages, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, over the course of that y'all have certainly heard a lot about over the course of the past year. Now, in our fight to win the Civilian Climate Corps and begin the decade of the Green New Deal, we are very near the passage of the largest investment in climate action in American history. Our movement mobilized over the course of the past year to really force our legislators to face the moral choice between the futures of young people, frontline communities, the futures of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and the future of our planet. We won over the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and held sidewalk occupations of California Senator Dianne Feinstein's Los Angeles office and of Arizona Senator Kyrsten Sinema's Phoenix office. We blockaded all 10 entrances to the White House, had trekkers march over 200 miles from Paradise, California to San Francisco, and over 400 miles in the Gulf South from New Orleans to Houston. Just recently, we had 5 brave Sunrisers go on a hunger strike for 2 weeks to emphasize the stakes of the need for the Build Back Better Act. Standing in solidarity with the New York taxi drivers who went on hunger strike for just and equitable working conditions and better pay. And then we mobilized and confronted Joe Maserati Manchin, who nearly ran over several teens and 20-somethings because he thought that it was more important for him to get out driving in his Maserati than to listen to the voices of the future. We told him exactly what we believed, which is that we want to live. And that's the plain truth. We just want to live. I grew up in a neighborhood laden with environmental burdens. My father has asthma, my brother has asthma, I had childhood asthma. I went to high school less than 2.5 miles from the largest refinery on the West Coast. Our health was put at risk because the fossil fuel industry believed it was okay to do business in our backyards, that our lives, our futures, our homes were sacrificial, expendable. That's no longer tenable. The status quo has to change. And if it doesn't, then the futures of everybody, of me and my community, of you and your community, of this country, of this planet, our futures are over. So I emphasize again, we want to live. And we will continue to fight for as long as we can, as hard as we need to build power so that we can win. We have no other option and no other choice. So I hope that everybody here stands alongside us as we continue this fight to achieve that which is just and equitable for our collective futures, for our communities, for us. We don't just want to live, we deserve to live.
Thank you so much, Shannon. I mean,
Wow.
Josiah. Wow. And wow. Next, Shannon, I'll turn it over to you for some calls to action.
Josiah, thank you so much. What a powerful voice. Really appreciate your standing in the front lines with us, and as Indigenous peoples, we honor all our young people. Next, we want to welcome up Trinity Tran. This is the call to action. Trinity Tran is the co-founder and lead organizer of the California Public Banking Alliance and Public Banking LA. Trinity led an all-volunteer coalition in 4 legislative wins, establishing 2 public banking laws in California and passed 2 motions in Los Angeles. Trinity is the executive director of Urban Partners Los Angeles, overseeing one of the largest food banks in Southern California. And thank you, Trinity, for being here. Can someone highlight her video? Trinity, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Shannon.
All right.
All right. And thank you to all the PPC organizers for convening this event. As Shannon mentioned, I Trinity Tran, and I oversee California Public Banking Alliance and Public Bank Los Angeles. And just within the span of a few short years, we've taken on Wall Street, one of the most destructive industries on the planet, with our entirely volunteer-led coalition. In just a few short years, we passed AB 857, the California Public Banking Act, which Governor Newsom signed in 2019. And then just last month, we passed our second public banking bill, AB 1177, the California Public Banking Option Act, which once this bill is implemented, it'll create the first universal, no cost, no fee, no penalty bank account option for all Californians to opt into a bank account to provide basic banking services, which is a solution to the predatory payday lenders and check cashers that poor people of color in California. It's 1 out of 10 people in California who are unbanked and underbanked. So that is part of the larger public banking ecosystem that we're working on. And right now, there is so much incredible movement and momentum in this space. It really is, it comes down to controlling the way our money flows, redefining finance, redirecting the flow of money from private interests and control back into the hands of the people to create local, sustainable, bottom-up movement building. And so, in just a few weeks ago, LA City Council just unanimously passed a motion to move forward with the first public bank. This would be the first city-owned public bank in the nation. So quite a few historic steps are happening right now, because, and it's important because our cities and states right now, they place their public funds. We're talking about billions of dollars of public funds that are sitting in private Wall Street banks. And legally, these corporate Wall Street banks control this money. which they use to finance harmful industries. As we know, our public funds are used to finance private prisons, immigrant detention centers, weapons manufacturers, fossil fuel pipelines. These are investments that prioritize corporate profit over our communities. And with public banking, we are moving from a finance system, which is now currently privately owned, to a publicly accountable system that is 100% transparent and accountable to our communities. A public bank, just a real brief and short, it's a nonprofit, not-for-profit institution. It's owned by public entities. It could be cities, counties, state, and it leverages its deposit base and lending power to benefit the public. Because they work in the public interest, they empower communities and redirect funds to finance very critical things that our community needs. We're talking about affordable housing and green energy infrastructure. In order to build the things that we need, it requires financing. To build on the incredible talks from this panel, tackling on climate change, implementing a Green New Deal at the local level, that's going to require an incredible amount, a significant investment in creating green new infrastructure, and public banking can be a tool to be able to get that done. To build an inclusive economy, a sustainable economy, to move towards zero carbon in Los Angeles. A city council member recently just introduced a motion here to move to transition the city's largest municipal utility, LADWP, towards zero carbon by 2035. So to implement those sort of the local Green New Deal, we need to be able to redirect resources. We need low cost, long-term financing so that we can build a green infrastructure, so that we can incorporate our sustainability and investment goals into the public bank's mandate. So it really comes down to three things why public banks are so critical in building a just world and building affordable housing and green energy infrastructure. It's one, public banks will empower us to divest from Wall Street. So that's getting our money out, our city treasury out from fossil fuel and pipeline investments, and instead redirecting that money into socially responsible investments that favor economic equity and environmental protection. So divesting from Wall Street, democratizing finance is the second important thing. It's creating a 100% accountable bank that's 100% accountable to our communities and funding local investments. So LA, San Francisco, San Diego, Central Coast, all of these cities up and down the coast of California right now are moving towards public banking. So if wherever you are in the country, join a local public banking movement, get involved in building being part of the financial revolution, which is really happening right now in real time, or reach out to us at the California Public Banking Alliance and we can help provide resources.
Trinity, I love you, man. Thank you so much for your great work. And man, you're a powerhouse here in LA. And man, I apologize to everybody. We could have done a couple of hours, 3 hours on this. And I want to turn it over to Patrick. Thank you, Trinity, for being here. Thank you so much. Public Banking LA. All right.
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Trinity. So having witnessed firsthand the overwhelming evils of injustice we face in this world, Dr. Martin Luther King once pointed out that in order for us to succeed in the cause of justice, those who love peace must learn to organize as effectively as those who love war. The climate crisis brings us face to face with a perfect storm of systemic evils as racism, poverty, militarism, the distorted narrative of religious nationalism, and ecological devastation combine together, wreaking havoc and destruction upon our planet and our people, especially the poor, people of color, and indigenous people. In order to face this common enemy of greed and corruption, it behooves us, it demands of us to give all that we can. And just as evils are connected and interlocked, so must we connect and interlock with all that is good in humanity, with all the hope, joy, love, peace, encouragement, beauty, and truth that we can find. To continue on this path together, we are proposing to begin a series of Zoom community forums addressing various topics connected to this climate crisis. We have a feedback form which asks for general information about this event, along with a question gauging interest in participating in these community forums. So please click on the link and fill out the form when you have a chance. In addition, we have a call to action doc, which I can drop in as soon as I finish this, which can be used as a resource, beginning with the PPC Jubilee Platform Part 4, points 5 and 7. The call to action doc offers you simple actions you can take today, as well as giving you resources and connection to continue on this journey as we transform our communities and world together, trudging along the arc that bends toward justice. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Patrick. So my name is Nell Hand. I use she and her pronouns, and I am a brown-skinned Black woman in Ohlone, which is also known as Oakland. And I have the honor of serving as a quad chair for the California campaign. I want to thank our speakers for their work in defense of the planet and all of us. Our testifiers put the fire in testifier. So our work at the Poor People's Campaign is focused on challenging the interlocking injustices that Patrick just mentioned, and our goals of amplifying the voices of people who are most directly impacted and building power to change policy can be experienced through events like this one and in the documents like the Jubilee Policy Platform and in the actions that we engage in that are to advance these policy demands, because we understand that, you know, it's not that's where the real change is going to happen, is when we can demand accountability from people who are elected to represent us, that they recognize that we're their constituents and they owe us. So we're inviting you to join us in demanding a comprehensive response. When we lift from the bottom, everybody rises. Tomorrow is a Moral Monday broadcast from Washington, D.C., where we'll be pressing the Congress to build back better from the bottom up. On Thursday, November 18th, at 6 o'clock, we'll hear from a multi-faith panel on constructing a moral narrative, dismantling Christian nationalism at the First AME Church in LA, and on the PPC Facebook page and YouTube channel. You can tune in there. We're gearing up to be in DC in the streets June 18, 2022 for a mass Poor People's and Low Wage Workers Assembly and Moral March on Washington. And so we are inviting you to help us in the process of getting ready to go to DC. You can contact us via email at the california@poorpeoplescampaign.org email address, or through the California Facebook page. Please donate. We are fundraising to bring impacted people to Washington, D.C. We want to bring as many impacted people from California who want to go. And so you can donate online, and that information will be in the chat, or you can send a check to our fiscal sponsor, Atina. We're raising funds to bring impacted people from California to D.C. in June. So thank you for joining. Forward together, not one step back.
Is Barbara Burney on?
I am. I'm sorry. I just had to unmute myself. This is Barbara Burney. I'm on unceded Tongva land in Los Angeles. And I just wanted to thank our amazing speakers, Tom Goldtooth, William Barber III, Jacqueline Barber Patterson, and thank you to our powerful testimonial from Josiah Edwards. Thank you to Trinity Tran for sharing information about the timely solution of public banking.
Up or cold?
Thank you.
The chicken?
Yeah.
Cold is fine.
Thank you to our facilitators, Margaret Prescott, Shannon Rivers, Patrick Iokimedes, Stacy Collins, Ward Kanofsky, excuse me for mispronouncing your names, Nell Hand. Thank you for prayers and blessings from Irene, from Shannon, and from Colleen. And thank you, Arnie Batson, for the inspiring music. And to members of the PPC Theomusicology and Lou Aya for the Protector song and video. And thank you to our tech team, Nell Myhand, Jim Pugh, Peg Miller, Ward Kanowski, David Green, Stacy Collins, Michelle Hayes, Rowan Fairgrove, Wendy Raskin, and Pat Schwinn. Thank you, Nell, for putting together our flyers, and thank you, Nancy Berlin, Irene Montantes, and others with the California PPC for help with our advertising. And thank you also to Kate Ziegler and National for advertising support. Thank you to Cindy Harris and the Interfaith Moral Action on Climate Eugene Shirley and Pandopoulos, and the Wellbeing Economy Alliance for help with advertising. And special thanks to KPFK 90.7 FM Los Angeles for helping get the word out and for broadcasting all of our presentation. And special thanks also to Pacific radio stations WBAI in New York and WPFW in Washington, DC for carrying this webinar. In addition, we want to thank Pacifica assistant producer Ramiro Funes for all their help and support. Oh, I'm sorry. Katia Stitt of WPFW, Linda Perry of WBAI, and Pacifica's Radio's Sojourner Truth assistant producer Ramiro Funes for all their help and support. And thank you to the many people who helped with planning this event. And of course, thank you all for coming and participating. Forward together.
Not one step back. And thank you, Barbara.
And our closing prayer, Colleen. It's Colleen on.
Yes, thank you, Margaret, and everyone. Deep breath. Our breath is a gift from our Creator. Clean air we breathe is a human right. In praise of the earth, we pray, let us bless the imagination of the earth that knew early the patience to harness the mind of time, waited for the seas to warm, ready to welcome the emergence of things, dreaming of voyaging among the stillness of land, and how light knew to nurse the growth until the face of the earth brightens beneath a vision of color. When the ages of ice came and sealed the earth inside, an endless coma of cold, the heart of the earth held hope, storing fragments of memory, ready for the return of the sun. Let us thank the earth that offers ground for home and holds our feet firm to walk in space open to infinite galaxies. Let us salute the silence and certainty of mountains, their sublime stillness, their dream-filled hearts, the wonder of a garden trusting the first warmth of spring until its black infinity of cells becomes charged with dream. Then the silent, slow nurture of the seed self, coaxing it to trust the act of death. The humility of the earth that transfigures all that has fallen of outlived growth. The kindness of the earth opening to receive our worn forms until the final stillness. Let us ask forgiveness of the earth for all our sins against her, for our violence and poisonings of her beauty. Let us remember within us the ancient clay, holding the memory of seasons, the passion of the wind, the fluency of water, the warmth of fire, the quiver touch of the sun, and shadowed sureness of the moon, that we may awaken to live to the full the dream of the earth, who chose us to emerge and incarnate its hidden night in mind, spirit, and light.
Shay, and so it is.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so very much. All please stay well and safe. And please, again, in the chat, there is information about being in touch with the California Poor People's Campaign. So moving, your prayer, Colleen, and what a way to end this incredible webinar. Thanks so all of you for joining us and the entire team. And Pacifica Radio will be continuing coverage to the top of this hour. So I'm gonna dash to host the rest of that. Thank you. Thank you again. Bye-bye.